When people talk about belief and disbelief, the conversation often gets tangled in labels. Two of the most common are atheist and agnostic. They're tossed around like they're opposites, or even enemies, as if one side says, "I know everything," and the other says, "I'm not sure." But in reality, these words don't describe two different species of thought. They describe different responses to one question. How much evidence do we actually have for a God? The line between them isn't made of concrete. It's more like fog. Some people call themselves agnostic because they don't feel certain either way. They might say, "We can't know for sure if a God exists." Others call themselves atheists because, after looking at the evidence, they find no convincing reason to believe. But both positions begin from the same starting point, a desire to know what's true, not just what feels comfortable. The confusion often comes from how people define these words. Many assume atheism means claiming with absolute certainty that no gods exist. But that's a misunderstanding. Atheism, in its simplest form, means a lack of belief in gods. It's not a declaration of omniscience. It's a conclusion based on the current evidence, or more precisely, the lack of it. Agnosticism, on the other hand, is about knowledge, not belief. The term itself comes from the Greek agnosis, meaning without knowledge. An agnostic is someone who admits we don't know, and in that sense, every honest person is agnostic about many things. None of us knows everything. But the key question is, do we live our lives as if a God exists, or as if there's no reliable reason to think one does? That's where atheism becomes a practical position. It's not about claiming certainty. It's about living in accordance with what the evidence shows. If there's no reason to believe a claim, the rational default is not to believe it until evidence appears. That's how we treat every other claim in life. We don't believe in invisible unicorns or energy-healing crystals unless something verifiable supports them. So why treat the idea of a God any differently? The tension between agnostics and atheists isn't really philosophical.
It's emotional.
Some agnostics see atheists as too confident or dismissive. Some atheists see agnostics as hesitant or unwilling to draw conclusions. But underneath that, both are responding to the same human need, to make sense of existence without being misled. Religion has long tried to blur this distinction on purpose. It thrives on the idea that doubt is weakness, that uncertainty is a moral flaw. But doubt is simply honesty in the face of limited information. It's the intellectual version of humility. When you don't know, you admit it. And when you see no evidence, you withhold belief. That's not arrogance. It's integrity. The irony is that in a deep sense, both agnostics and atheists live without faith in the unseen. The difference is often semantic, a matter of how cautious one wants to sound. And sometimes that caution is less about evidence and more about social comfort. In a world where declaring yourself an atheist can still cost you friends, family, or even your job, agnostic feels safer, softens the edges. It says, "I'm thoughtful, not hostile." But the core idea remains, we're all navigating uncertainty. The question is how we handle it, with belief, with doubt, or with careful skepticism. The debate between agnostics and atheists isn't about hostility. It's about method. Both camps question inherited stories about gods, souls, and afterlives, but they differ in how far they're willing to go with the evidence. The agnostic often says, "There might be something beyond our understanding, so I'll withhold judgment." The atheist says, "There might be, but until something shows up, I'll treat it as if there isn't." The difference might sound subtle, but it has major implications for how people live, reason, and talk about truth. When someone says they're agnostic, they often mean they reject organized religion, but can't rule out some higher force. They're open to mystery, to the possibility that consciousness or the universe has layers we haven't mapped yet. And that's a fair position. The universe is vast and mostly unknown. But the issue isn't whether the unknown exists. It's whether we're justified in inserting a God into it. Saying we don't know everything doesn't make a deity the best explanation for what we don't know. It just acknowledges ignorance, and ignorance doesn't automatically point to divine intent. Atheists often highlight this point. If you leave a gap in knowledge, that gap belongs to uncertainty, not to religion. Historically, almost every god of the gaps has shrunk as science advanced. Lightning once meant Zeus, disease meant demons. The stars were spirits and mental illness was possession. One by one, natural explanations replaced supernatural ones. Yet the emotional habit of assigning divine causes lingers, even when the logic behind it no longer fits. Agnostics sometimes resist full disbelief because of the scale of existence. The idea that life might have no inherent purpose feels heavy, even bleak. It's easier to say, maybe there's something higher, but that reaction comes from emotional discomfort, not logical necessity. Meaning doesn't vanish without a God, it shifts. It moves from external authority to internal creation. The question becomes not what plan am I fulfilling, but what kind of world can I help build? The atheist approach simply accepts that not knowing the ultimate answer doesn't require inventing one. There's humility in saying that we don't know yet, and that's okay. That attitude fuels science, philosophy, and progress. It keeps curiosity alive without pretending certainty where there isn't any. The agnostic may stop at uncertainty. The atheist uses uncertainty as a starting point. Interestingly, some of the most thoughtful, self-described agnostics are functionally atheists. They live as if no God exists, making decisions based on reason, not revelation. But they avoid the label because it feels final. They prefer to stay on the fence, even when all available evidence leans one way. And that's understandable. Identity around belief can carry social and psychological weight. Yet from a practical standpoint, the person who says, I don't believe in any gods, but I don't deny the possibility, is already aligned with the atheist position. The common ground is skepticism, the commitment to proportion belief to evidence. Where they diverge is in comfort with conclusion. Atheists draw a line where evidence stops. Agnostics draw it slightly further back just in case. But both operate far from religious thinking, which starts from belief and searches backward for justification. Another reason the distinction blurs is linguistic. Atheist sounds like an identity, while agnostic sounds like a position. People fear being boxed into the former, because religion has painted atheism as dogmatic. Ironically, atheism is the opposite of dogma. It's not a creed, it's an absence of one. It doesn't claim omniscience. It just refuses unwarranted claims. What both positions reveal is that humanity has matured beyond needing invisible guarantees to face uncertainty. The ancient fear of saying, I don't know, used to drive people into the arms of faith. Now more people are comfortable with not knowing, yet they differ on how to name that comfort. The agnostic says, we can't know. The atheist says, we don't believe. But both are saying, we want truth, not tradition. Public conversations about belief rarely treat agnosticism and atheism fairly. Religion has dominated the vocabulary for so long that anyone stepping outside it is forced to explain themselves in religious terms. You'll often hear believers ask, if you don't believe in God, what do you believe in? The question itself assumes that belief is a necessary starting point. It treats faith as a default setting rather than an optional one. That's one reason agnostics and atheists are often misunderstood. Many people can't imagine a worldview not anchored in belief. Yet disbelief isn't emptiness. It's clarity. It's the refusal to fill unanswered questions with comforting stories. Atheism and agnosticism aren't about removing meaning from life. They're about removing false meaning. Religion, for most of human history, functioned as a social glue. It gave structure, identity, and moral codes long before science or secular institutions existed. It answered questions no one yet had tools to explore. Why we're here, where we go, what makes life good or evil. Those answers shaped cultures, laws, and power systems. But they also built habits of thinking that equate not knowing with needing a God. Psychologically, the human brain resists uncertainty. Studies show we're more comfortable with a wrong answer than with none at all. This is why conspiracy theories and superstitions survive. They give shape to chaos. Religion, in that sense, is the oldest narrative control mechanism. It takes the unknown, stamps divine on it, and turns mystery into obedience. Agnosticism acknowledges that tendency. It recognizes that humans crave closure, but cautions against pretending we've achieved it. It's a pause, a conscious suspension of judgment. Atheism extends that pause indefinitely, saying, until something demonstrates itself as true, we don't call it truth. Both positions use reason as their compass. but atheism is simply the more decisive application of that compass. The irony is that religion itself has always relied on agnosticism to survive, not in the skeptical sense, but in the rhetorical one. Faith thrives on partial mystery. If a God revealed itself completely, faith would no longer be needed. But as long as there's a gap, as long as believers can say, we can't know everything, religion can fill that space. The agnostic's hesitation to rule out possibilities often mirrors the believer's comfort in leaving things unexplained. That's why, in debates, religious apologists often appeal to agnosticism. You can't prove there isn't a God. Of course, that statement is technically true, but logically hollow. You can't prove there isn't an invisible dragon in your garage either. The burden of proof always lies with the one making the claim. That's not arrogance, it's how reasoning works. Otherwise, every claim would be true until disproven. We'd be forced to believe in all contradictory gods simultaneously. The sociological side of this is fascinating. In many countries, calling yourself an atheist still carries stigma. People associate it with coldness, amorality, or even arrogance. Agnosticism, in contrast, feels polite. It signals open-mindedness. But that's a cultural artifact, not a philosophical one. In reality, open-mindedness isn't about entertaining all possibilities equally. It's about being willing to change your mind when evidence appears. An open mind is not an empty one. There's also a psychological reason why many agnostics avoid the final step into atheism: social belonging. Humans are tribal animals. Even in secular societies, religion provides community. Letting go of that can feel like exile. Saying I'm agnostic lets people ease out of the structure without full confrontation. It's a transitional identity, a bridge between inherited faith and full intellectual independence. That doesn't make it weak. It makes it human. Everyone moves at their own pace when disentangling belief from identity. But once the dust settles, the line between we can't know and there's no reason to believe starts to blur. The evidence doesn't change. Only the emotional comfort does. So when people frame atheism and agnosticism as rivals, they're missing the point. They're not two sides of a fight. They're steps on the same staircase, away from blind faith and toward intellectual honesty. The real opposition isn't between them. It's between both of them and dogma. One of the biggest misunderstandings about non-belief is the idea that rejecting religion leaves people morally adrift. Believers often say, without God, what stops you from doing wrong? It's a question rooted in fear, not in evidence. The assumption is that morality must be handed down from above, that without divine surveillance, chaos would erupt. But the reality of human behavior tells a different story. Studies on ethics, empathy, and cooperation reveal that moral instincts exist across cultures and species. Altruism, fairness, and compassion aren't divine gifts. They're evolved traits. Cooperation helped early humans survive. Empathy strengthened social bonds. Punishing harm reinforced group stability. These moral roots existed long before any religion wrote them into law. Religion didn't invent morality. It claimed ownership of it. Agnostics often wrestle with this question of moral grounding more than atheists do, because they're still entertaining the possibility that a higher being could be the source of moral order. But once you look at history, the picture becomes clear. Morality shifts as societies change. Things once justified by scripture, slavery, subjugation of women, execution for blasphemy, are now recognized as atrocities. If moral law came from an unchanging God, why would it evolve? The more plausible answer is that morality grows from human empathy and reason, not divine command. Atheism, in that sense, isn't moral nihilism. It's moral responsibility. It says there is no external judge to clean up our mess. We are accountable to each other. That's a heavier but more honest form of ethics. It replaces obedience with understanding. Doing good because you fear punishment is not morality. It's compliance. Doing good because you value well-being, fairness, and truth. That's morality grounded in reality. The debate between agnostics and atheists often touches on meaning, too. If there's no God, what's the point? That's where many agnostics hesitate. They don't want to let go of the idea that meaning has to come from something beyond them. But meaning isn't something found, it's something made. When you create, learn, love, or help others, you give life its own purpose. The absence of divine direction doesn't erase significance. It frees it from dogma. In this way, atheism can be seen as the completion of agnosticism, the point where uncertainty stops being a void and becomes creative freedom. The agnostic asks, how can we know for sure? The atheist answers, we can't, so let's build meaning anyway. Both start from humility, but atheism turns that humility into autonomy. It recognizes that even without cosmic guarantees, we can still craft morality, beauty, and progress. The fear of letting go of religion often hides a simpler truth. People aren't afraid of atheism. They're afraid of insignificance. Religion gives a narrative where each life is part of a divine script. But insignificance only exists if meaning has to come from outside ourselves. When we see that value arises from experience itself, the fear dissolves. We don't need eternity to make the moment worthwhile. Psychologically, agnosticism offers comfort in uncertainty. It allows people to say, I don't know, without abandoning hope. But atheism shows that hope doesn't have to rest on the supernatural. Hope can live in our ability to improve the world, in medicine, art, science, and empathy. The most meaningful progress in human history has come not from prayer, but from inquiry. The tension between agnostic caution and atheist conviction mirrors a deeper human tension, between curiosity and fear. Curiosity pushes us toward knowledge. Fear pulls us back into myth. The balance between those forces defines our evolution as a species. Every step forward, from discovering fire to exploring the cosmos, began with someone daring to say, maybe there's no magic here. Just natural law we haven't learned yet. Religion tells us that humility means submission to mystery. Atheism redefines humility as respect for evidence. It accepts that we are small in a vast universe, but it refuses to bow to invented explanations. That's not arrogance, it's intellectual courage. At some point, every conversation between an agnostic and an atheist reaches the same realization. They're not on opposite sides at all. They're standing on the same side of a larger divide, the one separating faith from reason. Both reject the idea that belief without evidence deserves respect, simply because it's comforting. Both recognize that truth doesn't bend to tradition. The difference is tone, not substance. One speaks with caution, the other with confidence. What unites them is the shared conviction that ideas should earn their place in our minds. A claim isn't true just because it's old or sacred or widely repeated. It's true if it holds up under scrutiny. And once you accept that, the ground beneath religion begins to crumble. Miracles lose their force when natural explanations exist. Sacred texts lose authority when contradictions appear. Clergy lose moral power when morality is shown to be human, not divine. Agnostics and atheists together represent the modern evolution of doubt, a necessary counterweight to centuries of unquestioned faith. They don't need to agree on every philosophical detail to stand for the same intellectual principle, that believing less, but understanding more, is a mark of progress. In that sense, the labels barely matter. What matters is the direction, away from inherited answers toward earned understanding. Society often treats disbelief as a void to be filled, but it's more accurate to see it as a clearing, space where better ideas can grow. When the authority of the supernatural fades, science, philosophy, and art expand to fill the gap. We stop waiting for revelation and start building knowledge. History's greatest leaps, medicine, technology, democracy, human rights, came not from prayer, but from questioning what was once sacred. That questioning continues today. When an agnostic says, I'm not sure, and an atheist says, I don't believe, both are exercising the same muscle, skepticism. It's the mental immune system that protects against comforting falsehoods. Religion often portrays doubt as disease, but doubt is what keeps the mind healthy. Without it, belief becomes infection, spreading through fear, guilt, and repetition. With it, we can cure superstition with evidence and replace dogma with dialogue. A world that embraces this kind of thinking doesn't become empty or cynical. It becomes honest. It becomes capable of wonder that doesn't depend on magic. Wonder at galaxies, neurons, evolution, and consciousness itself. These are not lesser mysteries. They're deeper ones because they can be explored, understood, and built upon. A belief that collapses under investigation is not sacred. It's fragile. A truth that survives investigation doesn't need faith to stand. Agnostics keep the flame of curiosity alive. Atheists build with its light. Together, they embody the best of human thought: humility without surrender, and courage without arrogance. The future of human understanding depends less on whether people identify as one or the other, and more on whether they're willing to question inherited certainty. When religion first emerged, it was humanity's attempt to make sense of a frightening world. Thunder, death, the stars, and all demanded explanations. But we've grown. We've learned to harness thunder, study death, and walk among the stars. The old gods were placeholders for ignorance. Now, ignorance is no longer holy. The sacred has moved from temples to telescopes, from prayer books to laboratories, from obedience to exploration. In this light, the debate between agnostics and atheists becomes less about identity and more about honesty. Both positions admit we are small beings in a vast, uncertain universe. The difference is what we do with that knowledge. The agnostic says, "I don't know." The atheist says, "Neither do I, but I won't pretend." That small distinction is the foundation of intellectual integrity. Perhaps the most powerful truth in all of this is that meaning, morality, and awe don't depend on gods at all. They're woven into human experience. We don't need eternal reward to act with kindness, or cosmic authorship to feel purpose. The stars don't need us to be grateful to shine. They shine because that's what stars do, and we, as conscious beings, can find beauty in that. Not because a deity told us to, but because awareness itself is extraordinary. So the debate ends where it began, with a question of evidence. Not to divide, but to remind us what really matters, that belief should follow proof, not precede it. Whether one calls themselves agnostic or atheist, the goal is the same: to live honestly within reality, however uncertain it may be. That honesty, far from being cold or hopeless, is the deepest form of respect for existence itself.